Listen, babies, none of this is hard. Like, I bet most of you out there have, at least 3 podcasts that you're doing, and everybody's figured out how to make the equipment run but me. Meanwhile, I'm back in, pirate radio days and trying to queue up my own records. It's a struggle for me. The equipment, the files, not deleting everyone else's files. It's a thing that I have to constantly worry about. Not that I'm asking for sympathy, but I sort of am in advance of telling you. I mean, we all know the importance of keeping your nuts dry because they might, otherwise sprout. And the other day while I was swimming, I passed by a squirrel. I said, "Mr. Squirrel, why are you swimming on your back?" "Well, I swim on my back to keep my nuts dry." Okay. Anybody who knows where that joke came from is going to get an extra prize. I'm going to send you like a no-till growers market garden podcast hat if you can name where I got that joke. And for the rest of you who are judging me, chastising me, it's all lost on me. I can't hear you. The Brits are famous for their turns of phrase, and it turns out that they're also the ones who, added a lot of meaning to certain words. Take, for example, the word nutter. It used to be the noble name for one who gathers nuts. And then the Brits turned it into the definition of somebody who's lost their freaking mind. Someone who is crazy, silly, strange. Why am I telling you this? Why am I talking about this? Well, it's as a way of introducing my guest today, and you'll hear it. It will come out. I am so totally fangirling out about this project. Today I'm speaking with Justin Holt, a strong name, from the Asheville Nuttery, Asheville, North Carolina. And Justin is he's a nutter. That's what he is. And he shared with me a bio, which is, sort of typical, doesn't even remotely begin to describe this project that he has started, persevered with, etc. But Justin, before he introduces himself, he's worked in ecological agriculture, permaculture, and environmental education since 2011, right after the, you might remember, the first recession, the first Great Recession. And he is also co-founder of the Nutty Buddy Collective, Kudzu Culture, and the Asheville Nuttery. He leads foraging tours with No Taste Like Home, and he also works as a consultant for people and communities engaged in agroforestry. Obviously, this is a very long introduction. I know you're feel these so deeply, but you're gonna want to listen to this. It's really quite the nut to crack with you guys today. I'm stoked. You're gonna be stoked. We're all gonna be stoked. Doing the backstroke, keeping our nuts dry. Let's do it.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden Podcast is brought to you by Mowing Organic Seeds. It's seed browsing season, and Mowing Organic Seeds is celebrating their 30 new seed varieties for 2024. These beautiful and productive vegetable, flower, and herb varieties are 100% organic, Non-GMO Project Verified, and trialed for optimal performance in organic growing systems. Whether you're trying to bring your best to your CSA, wholesale assortment, or to the weekly farmers market, Mowing has the professional quality seeds and the grower rep support you need to help get you to harvest. Visit highmowingseeds.com and sign up for your free catalog today. That's highmowingseeds.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Organic Growers School. Join Organic Growers School for their spring conference at Mars Hill University in Western North Carolina, March 8th through 10th, 2024. The spring conference happens over 3 days with over 60 workshops organized into 13 themed tracks, such as mushrooms, cooking, gardening, farming, and living on the land. Plus, I, that's Farmer Jesse, will be there leading half-day workshops, so you won't want to miss it. Whether you are a home grower, food system advocate, or have a few farming years under your belt, this conference has something for everyone. For more information, visit organicgrowerschool.org/spring-conference. That's organicgrowerschool.org/spring-conference. I will put the link in the show notes. All right, enjoy the show.
Justin, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me this morning.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited to share this story. It's a little different than our usual, sort of traditional farmer kind of interviews. So it's pretty exciting. So let's just get right into you and what you do and what is Asheville Nuttery, and give us a little bit of your background and what about your life has led you to do this very cool project.
Let's see. So yeah, I guess I just kind of stumbled into it. I went to UNCA. It's how I landed in Asheville. I grew up in New York, and I grew up in the Hudson Valley, and was not aware of it at the time, but upon reflection, I think a love of trees and tree crops was kind of imprinted on me from an early age. It probably is with a lot of people too. You spend a lot of time in the woods if you're lucky enough to grow up around some trees as a kid, and I definitely did that. And just really loved being outside. I grew up on what was a farm in a small town called Pine Bush, and it was, by the time my family arrived there, had been kind of carved up and turned into a development, but there were still old stone walls from the farm and a lot of big old oak and hickory trees that kind of nurtured me. I grew up in the shade of those trees. And then we would go every year to the apple orchards. That's one of the kind of great apple growing regions of the eastern part of the country. And I always just really loved being there among the apple trees and kind of like that amazing feeling of being surrounded by these kind of obscenely abundant trees. And yeah, I came to UNCA and studied music and Spanish and didn't really know anything about plants or agriculture until after I graduated. I graduated in 2008 when the global economy collapsed. And,
I remember that.
yeah, fun times. And so I was, kind of, I felt a little unmoored and a little scared and a little unsure of what to do with myself. And I just graduated from UNCA with this kind of broad liberal arts education, and had a kind of growing awareness of the kind of interconnections between the financial crisis and the climate crisis and all the different interlocking crises we face. And really kind of was unsure what to do, and felt sure I didn't want to go ahead and just try and get a job and be a part of this economy that didn't seem like it had much of a future anyway at that time. And so I kind of stumbled my way into a permaculture design course, and that really set me off on this path. And I did an apprenticeship with one of the teachers of the class. Zev Friedman was the teacher, and he's since become a good friend and collaborator and supporter. And that really just that experience set me off and on this path. And then, kind of one of the things at the heart of permaculture and permaculture design is perennials and tree crops in particular. In fact, the name permaculture, originally the inspiration comes from the subtitle of the book Tree Crops: A Permanent Agriculture, which is this really influential book, kind of among people who are into perennial agriculture, written by a man named J.R. Smith in the, I want to say 1920s and 30s.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Yeah, fantastic book. And so, yeah, A Permanent Agriculture, and that was kind of portmanteaued into permaculture. And so, I really wanted to get into permaculture. I didn't have any land. I didn't own any land to plant perennials and long-lived trees on. And was really kind of wrestling with that reality that is like, I have this conviction that we really need to kind of align our kind of provisioning of all of everything we need with the kind of the needs of the ecosystem, and like the land here wants to be forest, and so tree crops make a whole lot of sense from for a lot of reasons, and I'm sure we can dig into more of that. But this kind of like inherent structural alienation we all face, or it's like we don't have land. If we do have land, it's kind of a tenuous situation. Often it's like, people we're not deeply connected to our places, and land is expensive and getting more and more expensive, and it's just really hard to kind of get into growing tree crops when in that context. And so I was really kind of struggling with that and trying to understand what to do, and meanwhile trying to make a living. I was really thrilled when I discovered a group here called the Buncombe County Fruit and Nut Club, which was a group of folks who basically, from my perspective, what they were doing was just taking what was theirs in terms of land access and planting trees in public parks and taking care of fruit trees and nut trees in city parks and other public spaces. And so this is kind of like a whole outside of the box way of thinking about land access that really got me pretty jazzed. And I jumped in and started to work with that group quite a bit. And then there was a kind of a handful of us that were really active with kind of organizing work days and really put a lot of effort into taking care of these trees. And that kind of coalesced into this group that was looking for land, and an opportunity came up where Bill, who is one of my partners and one of that group, was selling pears at the market one day. He's got a farm actually in West Virginia and spends part of his time here in Asheville. And one of his clients was offering or was putting her land into conservation with the local land conservancy. And she just kind of was in conversation with him, and they kind of spontaneously came up with this idea to create a food forest on some of that land that she was putting into conservation. And that evolved into her signing a 99-year lease with a group that we formed to plant a fruit and nut orchard on 4 acres there. And so that was the birth of the Nutty Buddy Collective. And there were 5 of us who started that. And shortly after that lease was signed, we landed another 99-year lease.
Wow.
And so, we currently have 2 4-acre orchards just outside of Asheville here that are mostly in fruit and nut trees. And mostly nut trees is the focus. We've got some fruit trees between them. And after a few years of taking care of the orchards and getting them established, we started to turn our attention to the question. There aren't really existing markets for hardly any of the nut crops that grow well here, and so we realized that we would just have to start to create those markets and figure out how to do the processing to bring those crops to market. And that evolved into the launching of another project, which is the Asheville Nuttery. And I guess the way that started is we had a fundraiser. We had a really fun fundraiser called the Carnival of Nuts, and we really just like foods and do all kinds of different things. We had nut putt, and my wife did a aerial flying squirrel performance, and someone made a chestnut beer.
Cool.
And I think there's a Hickory Nut Milk vegan ice cream, all kinds of amazing stuff. And that fundraiser launched a Kickstarter that kind of got us to start to acquire some of the key pieces of equipment to get it rolling. And since then it's just been kind of slow incremental progress toward where we're at today, which is really starting to feel like we've got an actual business plan that we can start to scale up and get some real funds for.
It's so interesting to think that this sort of end state, that the Nuttery grew so kind of organically and happenstancely because of the colliding forces of economic collapse. And I love it when necessity breeds ingenuity like this. And I wonder, can you talk a little bit more in detail about the Nuttery itself and how how you had to source specialized equipment and really develop new markets? I mean, these are foods that people haven't been eating for a very long time in some cases, especially when you get into things like acorns, which I love and I can't wait to hear more about. So talk about let's get deep in the nuts.
Yeah. I would say a fairly robust kind of cottage industry scale kind of infrastructure out there for like you can buy Nuttercrackers that you can crack and process all of these nuts with by hand at home. So all of that exists and has been or was really critical for our kind of like early learning and figuring out how to do this. But yeah, you outgrow that stuff pretty quickly when you're trying to, get any kind of economy of scale going. And then it's like you're on your own. Like there's nothing out there for a lot of these crops. And if there is, it's like very hard to find, very limited. For example, there was one cracker kind of on the market for a few years that seemed like it was the kind of standard bearer for hickories and black walnuts, called the Mojave. And there was one or two people making them, and they stopped making them. Maybe they passed away. I don't know the whole story, but until this other guy started to make a design that he'd been working on for a while available, there wasn't a cracker that was available commercially at the kind of, anything larger than a tabletop kind of hand cracker. So we were lucky enough to get our hands on a Mojave. It was kind of leftover from a grant research project that a guy named Kurt Belser did in Ohio. He wrote a pretty interesting paper people might like to check out called Niche Nuts that was funded by SARE. And so you can find that if you just search Niche Nuts.
Yeah,
Kurt Belser.
We'll link to that.
So we connected with him, and he had some equipment left over from that he made available to us for a low cost. We with that fundraiser, we bought the Patriot Nutcracker, and that's the one I was referring to as the kind of like the one that is available that is one of the few that you can buy that is actually capable of cracking the very hard, thick-shelled black walnuts and hickory nuts. Once you have the nuts cracked, then you've got to sort them and sip them into different sizes. And we played around with different approaches for that. And we built a kind of tumbler sorter called a trommel that just grades the nuts into different sizes and gets the dust out. And then we moved to a shaker table situation, which is like, a series of screens with vibrating screens, and all of that is stuff we just built. And then we figured out a kind of early breakthrough in sorting. The first year we were just sorting everything by hand, and do it, and it was not not a viable way to do it. We in the early years we've just and really since we've started, we've been throwing just a lot of kind of I call it volunteering for our future selves.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of volunteer labor from ourselves at this to just really we've been in R&D mode since we've started, and I think we just kind of are turning the corner on that now, and I can get into that later. But to start, we were hand sorting, and then we figured out that you can add some salt in salt water, and the shells will sink if you get it just right. And so you get that change the density of the water just the right amount, and you can get pretty good separation. But then you've got, of course, salty, wet nuts that need to get cleaned and then dehydrated, and it changes the quality of the nuts, and it's overall it's not great. It was improvement definitely on doing everything by hand, but that was kind of one of the iterations. So we built a kind of like whole floating
bath
rig. Yeah. There are other pieces of equipment, and we've tinkered with so many different ideas for how to, particularly with the black walnuts, how to separate the kernel from the shell. It's really hard. The density is very similar. The color is very similar.
Yeah.
And the nut itself is very hard. The kernel clings, the shell kind of it clings onto the kernel.
It's like wearing a jacket, kind of. I mean, you really have to. Bunch of nuts. We used to crack nuts all winter long, and I love it. I remember it, but I try to think of how to mechanize that, and I'm like, how?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say you love it, because I love it too, and I think a lot of people really do, up to a point.
Mm-hmm. Right. I've never had to do it at scale. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's funny. I was just talking to a friend last night about that. This woman Beverly, who's been kind of, we call her one of our fairy godmothers, and she grew up in rural North Carolina, and her family, in some years, really like relied on their black walnuts to survive, and so she's got a really deep history with black walnuts, and it has all these beautiful stories, and we just invested in an optical sorter, which is a kind of like AI powered sorting machine that is going to be really the thing that is the game changer for us now, to be able to process efficiently at scale enough to where we can actually start paying ourselves a wage. And she was just kind of lamenting that, because getting together to sort nuts was something we would do a lot. And so it was, just kind of an excuse to get together, a reason to get together and sit around and tell stories and talk, hand sorting nuts together. She was kind of saying it was a little bit like when the automated corn equipment came in,
Totally.
And that was wreaked havoc on rural communities. It's like with a little bit of I don't know.
a little sadness. Yeah.
Yeah, a little sadness, a little bit of a mixed blessing to be kind of gaining efficiency and kind of moving into the scale. So it's a funny place to be. We're really like very rootsy and very interested in and rooted in kind of the community nature of this project. And really, it's really more about that than anything else. It's like the food is almost secondary. At the same time, we gotta cover our costs and pay
if you ever want a paycheck. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we're trying to navigate what is the kind of most appropriate scale to be operating at and seeking to achieve. But I feel like that was a little bit of a tangent. I don't know if there was a.
No, I love that tangent though, and I think it was a piece of this that I really wanted to get into, because one of the real beauties that when I came across that article in Civil Eats about you guys, is this idea of a project that not only captures what beautiful abundance and food we walk past every day, like anybody who lives in a hardwood area can appreciate, and anyone who grew up with old apple trees around, you walk past them on your way to school or whatever, and it's like windfall survival everywhere, and also that piece of community. And when there is that kind of abundance that isn't kind of under anyone's particular care or someone's economic model, the community would that was part of how we held community, was the sort of survival mechanisms of corn shucking parties and putting up food and fermenting food and all of the things that used to bring groups of people together, because that's the only way you can do it efficiently. And so I was also thinking about, how you could sustain that as your livelihood, in a sort of beyond the homesteader or whatever scale you want to call that. And there is that trade-off. And so maybe before we, just because we went on this little tangent, maybe have you thought about how to, because you were so community supported to get this going, and how many years it's taken to kind of get the equipment that you need and all those things. And it seems like the community's really been a big part of keeping you guys going. And is it part of how you're thinking about the future, how to keep that spirit sort of imbued in what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's I guess what comes to mind is a couple of things. Well, so, the community aspect is very much something we're just like structurally, like inherently going to have to rely on because of the way we're sourcing our nuts. All of the nuts that come to the nuttery, we did somewhere between 14 and 15,000 pounds of nuts this year. That's black walnuts, acorns, hickories, and various species of those. And every single one of those pounds was gathered by, someone in the community. We don't like officially as the nuttery go out and gather any nuts. All three of us who are the partners in it are also kind of like, we call them gatherers or foragers, and so people are bringing in nuts from their yards, from their farms, from local parks, wherever they're finding them. And that is the only way we're getting our nuts. So keeping some kind of sense of community and connection to folks in that regard is really important. And my great aspiration for this is to go even deeper and deeper with that, and maybe eventually have this business, which is just an LLC now with 3 partners, be structured like a multi-member cooperative where all of the gatherers are bought into it as co-op members and have some amount of say, and I don't know how the business is run, how we set our prices, and then they get some relative amount of return from the profit. So I think there's a lot of potential there. But really it's just right at this point, it's not quite time for that until we've got an actual viable business plan. So that comes to mind for sure. And then also trying to, another aspiration of mine is to like always be like trying to pay the highest price we possibly can for nuts, to keep people feeling like this is something they can continue to invest their time and energy into. And I think we do a pretty good job of that. I mean, just one point of comparison is there's one of the very few other organizations that are buying black walnuts is the one big player in black walnuts in the country. It's Hammond's, and they're in Missouri, and they ship, I don't know, 20 million pounds of black walnuts to their processing facility every year, and our price is better than theirs by like about 25%.
Wow.
So we're trying to do our best to make it worth people's while. And And yeah, and then we pay a pretty high price for the acorns. Some of the acorns that are a little bit higher value because they have a high oil content. We can talk about that. Are I think we're paying $2 a pound for some of those. So some people made a few $100s on picking up acorns this year, bringing them to us.
That's so
and
cool.
Then the other thing about the community that's coming to mind right now is kind of going back to this question about scale. It's like we know we need to get bigger than the kind of like home scale processing, but we also don't want to become another Hammond's where there's we're consolidating basically the entire nation's harvest into one place.
Right.
And
those are commercially grown nuts. I mean, that's another thing too. Yeah. Anyway, we'll keep going.
Yeah. I do want to come back to that. That's a really important piece. But yeah, well, and Hammond's is sourcing almost all of their nuts are wild nuts also. And
is that right? I suppose that would be true with the black walnuts, especially. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, there's some commercial growers, and most of them are in Missouri, where Hammond's is at. And but yeah, for the most part, the industry does not really exist on a commercial scale for production, anyway. Yeah, what we're kind of envisioning is, I guess, what's described by the Acornucopia Project. So this is kind of yet a third project we've launched. And this is really the kind of brainchild and terrain of my partner Bill. So he's really the keeper of the Acornucopia Project. But that is basically this. The concept is that just like we used to have grain mills in every rural community, not every farmer who was growing grains needed to have all of the equipment necessary to do all the processing. Why not have community nut mills? And by creating that infrastructure, these crops that are not considered to be crops in like, mostly it's like in the best case, sometimes people will let their pigs eat them, and mostly they're just ignored. And worst case, it's like they're considered to be a nuisance because they're dropping on driveways and cars and such. Turn that into a resource for folks and make it possible for people to tap into that amazing nutritional and ideally even a significant economic resource if we can figure out how to make it really truly viable for everyone in the kind of supply chain. So what we're doing with the Acornucopia Project is just kind of like, at this point, really just kind of promoting the concept. And Bill has kind of gone out on some kind of like little promotional tours where he'll kind of share the vision and kind of celebrate the foods and share the foods and the crops and such. And he calls it Circus Quercus.
I love that. Quercus, for the audience, being the Latin name for oak, that's very funny.
Yeah, he's got a knack for naming things. So the idea there is like kind of start to introduce the concept to different communities and then help them start to develop the infrastructure for their own community nut mills in whatever ways make sense for them. And there's a few folks around our region who have started to do that. Probably the most developed is in Virginia. There's one of the last existing or functioning water-powered stone mills, maybe in the country, and Bill's working with them, and they're really focusing there on acorn flour and milling acorn flour there.
Wow.
And there's some folks down in the Piedmont, North Carolina here that are interested. I think this year going to buy or manufacture a black walnut huller that will allow them to kind of value add the black walnuts and reduce the shipping weight, so then they can bring hulled, cured black walnuts up here and then we can, crack them for them, and they can either take them back and, we could kind of do a white label thing and they market it as their own products, or maybe it just goes directly back to the people who gathered them as food. And so, yeah, there are a lot of people who over the years have reached out, and I kind of think of it as a very kind of long, slow project that will start to build momentum, I think, as the Nuttery, which I think is kind of like the flagship project that maybe eventually the Asheville Nuttery will be one among, who knows, hundreds of nutteries throughout our region and beyond. So I think as we kind of like have better proof of concept and are paying our bills and feel like we're in a little bit more of solid footing with it, I suspect it'll really take off. But I think on that is really like the main kind of community, the communitarian aspect of this is like a very, very kind of broad community of people collaborating to really, I don't know, I mean, bring forth a new nut economy, a new local nut economy.
I just am so I can't help myself. Would you say it's like planting a tree under which you will never sit? I mean, it's really okay. So I have to ask, because this is extraordinary. It's the kind of thing that I'm so excited about, because this is an exercise not only in total devotion to something that has just kind of grown. I don't know if you always had these ultimate goals in mind, or if they've sort of happened as you've come along, but it's really incredible. And I want to just pay some homage to what it would take specifically for, a couple of dudes to see it through this far, and then to have aspirations beyond that are so community focused and so just kind of altruistic. I mean, I know you guys ultimately hope to pay yourselves decently, and you probably have a whole idea of what that looks like eventually. But what is it about like who you guys are and your backgrounds and maybe how you've come together that has enabled you to persevere this long? I mean, I'm assuming that you didn't drive into town on a pile of cash that you were ready to burn. And so, so like, how is one of you just really good at the pitch deck thing? And obviously, how?
Oh, yeah, right. How? That's a good question. Well, a few things come up, and
you married well.
No. Yeah, no, I mean, there's not a pile of cash we're sitting on. We've been very, very scrappy, and really just trying to do everything for as little money as possible. And I don't know. I mean, it's like there are three of us who are the partners, but there are so many people who have been involved at different points in this that we wouldn't be where we're at without them, and maybe it would have fallen apart if they hadn't stepped up right at that moment. So I mean, I could start to list them off, in their roles, but just to say, it's like there's been a lot of people I think who like yourself are really compelled by the vision, and I feel the same way. It's just like, I mean, I don't feel like this is my vision. I feel like it's something I have the honor to get to be a part of and to carry out, and it really is like that. We're I mean, when you start to zoom out from these ideas of the tree crops and think about the ecology and learn about the history of the development of the eastern forest and the millennia of labor and care that the indigenous people here put into making the forest. Like, people don't realize that we have oak hickory dominated forest and formerly American chestnut forest not as an accident,
Right.
as a matter of like the labor of people caring for the forest and making it so that they could live in nut orchard, basically a continental scale nut orchard. Through fire management and lots of different techniques, and cultural landscaping. I love that term you used in your email to me. It's one I hadn't heard before, but I feel like that's exactly what had been going on. So, I feel like in some ways we're just kind of trying to carry on the legacy of what had been going on here prior to colonization and the kind of like, industrialization and commodification of the entire landscape. And there are been a lot of people since that time, like J.R. Smith and all the efforts around kind of tree crops throughout the 20th century. And we've had so many kind of fairy godmothers along the way. Like I mentioned, Beverly, and so the two women who have leased land to us, who really help us kind of get our feet under us and direct our kind of energy for this stuff into some land. And there were 5 of us who started that project. So the other 2 guys who are no longer part of the group, they were a huge part of the early momentum. And we had some we didn't get any big loans, but we had some small 0 interest loans from some people who had a little bit of funds to put into it that allowed us to buy our oil press, which has been a big part of a big essential piece of equipment. So I would say a ton of people along the way. And then I was also just laughing because I was thinking about preparing for this discussion, and I remembered that I had pinned this quote on the wall in my office. It's not really something I do, but I read, I'm sure you read the book, The Overstory by Richard Powers.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there was just a passage in that book that really just spoke to me. And so I wrote it down and pinned it on my wall. I wonder if I could just read it for you.
Please
real quickly.
do. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is about the character in the book that's like a video game designer. And it goes like this. So he'll unfold the creation in gradual evolutionary stages over the course of decades. The game will put its players smack in the middle of a living, breathing, seething, animist world filled with millions of different species, a world desperately in need of the players' help. And the goal of the game will be to figure out what the new and desperate world wants from you. And then just a bit later, and down in cool riparian corridors, smelling of silt and decaying needles, redwoods work a plan that will take 1,000 years to realize. The plan that now uses him, although he thinks it's his.
There's so many things about how I stumbled across this idea of you guys, and I have that page torn out of that book, and it's in my workspace in the winery, because I also I have a small obsession I don't talk about very much with video games, and I just love that character, and that is such a poetic. It's the way that I think when I was writing to you about this idea of bringing back the community-driven sort of cultural stewardship, cultural landscaping idea, which I obsess about, because I think that agriculture, if we think of it as it's just even using the word anymore, that is such an entrenched paradigm that we need to have these new we need to have these new words, and we need to have new frameworks for how we think about where our food comes from, and this idea of bringing back beautiful, abundant landscapes that are under everyone's care, not just the provenance of the few. And it's why I harass you so aggressively about talking to me, because I think that this is so it's the most promising idea that I've come across in bringing about what I hope a future world kind of looks like. And it's not that it's not even recreating something. It's something that was carried on, as you say, for millennia by the stewards of these lands prior to colonialization. So, but that's so creepy that we both had that, because
It's
I
really
also,
funny.
I'm not like a quote person. I don't have them laying around, but I tore the page and I don't abuse my books either. So it was a
Yeah,
it affected me a lot also. That's really just so funny.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Ohio Earth Food. If you grow plants, you know that to a farm of any size, your soil is your most steadfast partner, an asset worthy of investing in. Since 1972, Ohio Earth Food has been the go-to source for the highest performing and most cost-effective granular and liquid fertilizers, seed starting soils, foliar sprays, and disease and insect controls, all approved for use on organic farms. They deliver them right to your farm, too. Don't count on luck this year. Start your seeds in their Plant Pro and the Seed Catapult potting soils, and put their ReVita fertilizers in your soil before you plant, and rest assured that your plants will have all the nutrients, stimulants, and energy for whatever comes their way. These natural blends utilize compost, kelp, and humate, and are low salt index safe for high tunnels. Feed your soils and let your soil feed the plants. Visit them at ohioearthfood.com, now with branches in Ohio and Wisconsin. ohioearthfood.com. All right, back to the show.
I mean, one other thing does kind of come up, just to speak to something you were saying there about, I totally agree about the entrenchment of the kind of notions of what agriculture is or ought to be. It feels like, the conversation around agriculture, which of course is in crisis like everything else, that conversation is kind of constrained, and we don't really, and also, like I was talking about with land and land access, and it's like this whole young generation of people who want to get into farming, but like it's not even like they're not even going to like entertain the idea of dreaming of it because there's no way they're going to ever afford the land, and once they can't afford the land, it's like starting a farm from scratch. Not having been there, and so it's. And land prices are not there. It's not going down ever. It doesn't seem like. So what to do about this problem? And the kind of different way of thinking about it that's been really most compelling to me in my last 10 years since kind of encountering the concept is the framework of the commons as a kind of like alternative to the kind of binary. It's like either land is commodified and privatized, or it's owned by the state and managed by the state. And there's this whole incredible history that I just know like the tiniest little bit of sliver of basically common ownership and access and use and management of the landscape. And there's a lot then we would want to get into right now, and I don't feel particularly expert or prepared to talk much about the commons, but just one thing that I've been sitting with recently is the idea of enchantment. And there's this one writer, Silvia Federici, who's been a really great inspiration for me in this concept. And she has a book. I forget the whole title, but it's something like the reimagining of the commons. And I feel like that is like really the very at the very heart of what I'm hoping to be doing with this work. And kind of if you can bend over and pick up a nut in your public park and then bring it somewhere to some friends who have some equipment that can turn it into food for you and your family, or buy whatever you need, that is like I don't know. It seems so simple, but also it feels really profound to like, step outside of the kind of very constrained notion of land
Grocery
and land
stores.
access and what we like, that we need to own land in order to be able to kind of provide for ourselves and meet our needs as individuals, as families, as community. So yeah, that's just something that's kind of stirring around. You can see don't have all my kind of thoughts about it fully articulated, but that's been really kind of given me a lot of juice.
There's so much there in terms of empowering people and communities that really don't have a lot of sources of empowerment right now. And like you say, it's not, you don't take your bag of acorns home and eat them. It becomes part of developing a community and a provisioning that brings people together. And I also don't have it all formed in my head, but I'm totally obsessed with you guys. And I want everybody to listen to this podcast. So I also want to give you some space to talk about the products, because some of them, people don't think about acorns outside of, I need to get these off my sidewalk so that somebody doesn't sue me for slipping and falling or whatever. But my background is in forest ecology and oaks, hickories, chestnuts, all of these hardwoods of the sort of American landscape that have been not just huge cultural, kind of bastions of how they supported humans on this landscape, but also just we know how they hit so far above their ecological weight. I mean, if you compare them to other trees in terms of what they support in the ecosystem. And so, but again, like I live out in the West, and our dominant species, the white oak, super tannic acorns. And so even finding the foods that you could eat without vomiting, it's an effort. And it sounds like you guys are making some extraordinary foods. So talk about those and how again, this is like so much R&D that you guys are that you are getting to do for what people could do in the future, which is so cool.
Yeah, right. It's like everything we talked about aside, like it might be worth doing this just because of how awesome these foods are. Yeah. Actually, like the first time I had a hickory nut, like a really delicious sweet hickory nut, it was really like, I feel like it was like a religious conversion experience. Like I just was like blown away that this flavor is just hanging out there in the woods and, in our parks. And I picked this one up like at the edge of a parking lot next to a tattoo shop in town. And it was like, so hickory nuts people know hickory nuts because people know pecans, right? And pecan is a hickory. It's just a very thin shelled, I'm gonna say it, inferior hickory. It's really
you
wonderful.
I
love
folks.
pecans so much,
but it's so different. Probably a lot of people have never had hickory because they are mostly in parks now. So talk about them.
Yeah. So what you do with a hickory nut, and this is again an innovation of, I know it from the Cherokee, and I'm sure other indigenous people traditionally have prepared it this way, but the Cherokee are known for making hickory nut milk. And so the catch with a hickory is that it's very thin, very thick shelled, and the shells are very convoluted, so it's hard to get to the nut. It's really a lot of work to pick the kernel out and eat it. And so what the Cherokee do is to crush the whole nut, the shell and the kernel together, and then pick out some of the shell, and then simmer that. And that results in a really rich, oily, very, very flavorful broth that, the way I describe the flavor, it's like liquid banana nut bread. It's just like, it's so dreamy. and there really is like the banana note. I'm not just making that up. Like,
no, it's really true.
People really get that banana flavor. Yeah. So yeah, Hickory Nut Milk is one that we get to have occasionally. The one of the challenges with all the nut trees is the mast cycle, and around here anyway, the hickories are a particularly long periods between when they have a big crop. Yeah, that's true, and there's variability from species to species, region to region, but that's one of the really big challenges of working with the nuts, and maybe we'll come back to. So yeah, kind of stay on the products. So you mentioned acorns. White oaks are tend to be a little bit lower in tannic acid than some of the other acorns, and they have a really nice kind of, I don't know, I want to say almost like a caramel kind of notes to the flavor that that I really love. And so we work with all species of acorns. All species of acorns are edible, and there's maybe 30 to 40 species that grow here, and some of them are really high in or relatively high in oil, and there's a whole long list of them that are like that. And you can know if your acorn has a high oil content by looking at it. You can crack the acorn open, and if it has like a very bright yellow or even an orange color to the kernel, that's a good indicator that it's got a high oil content, high enough to press the oil out of it. So that's probably like our fanciest, most expensive, most precious product is the acorn oil. It's really hard to describe. It's like it's this amazing kind of amber, golden color, and the flavor it's like fruity, and it's very complex. I'm kind of at a loss for how to describe it often, and it's very high in oleic and linoleic acid. So these are like the same fatty acids that make olive oil so delicious and nutritious. And so from one perspective, these oak trees, and I'll talk about some other nuts that we're using for oil, are kind of like our native alternative to olive oil. Like there's no reason other than that it's going to take a lot of work to get there that we couldn't have a whole native oil tree industry, just very similar to the olive oil in the Mediterranean and in California, here on the east. So yeah, acorns there's a lot of promise and potential there, and that acorn oil is really best, I think, as a kind of a finishing oil. It's got a pretty low smoke point, but I like it on just about anything. Particularly good on oatmeal. I like to drizzle it on steamed vegetables, on vanilla ice cream. That's like
wow.
Yeah, so anything you would do with a fine oil, you can do the same with the acorn oil. And it's really cool with the acorn oil. The tannic acid that makes acorns inedible in the raw state is soluble in water and not in oil. So you can press the oil out and not have to do the work of leaching the tannins out. And that's pretty cool. But then if you get the acorns really clean before they go into the oil press and they don't have any shell in them, you have two products, because the byproduct of pressing the oil is what we call press cake, and that can be leached then and turned into acorn flour. And so we make a lot of acorn flour that way. And yeah, acorn flour I think is probably better known than acorn oil, but yeah, use it like any flour. My favorite thing to do with acorn flour is combine it with chestnut flour. Acorn flour, you leach the tannins out, but there's still like a little bit of bitterness to it, a slight astringency. We find that if you leach all of the astringency out, the flavor kind of gets a little flat. So we like to leave a little astringency in there. And so you combine it then with chestnut flour, and chestnuts are naturally sweet. It's a match made in heaven. And so my favorite use of acorn flour so far has been to make acorn chestnut waffles.
Wow.
And then you put some black walnuts on that and drizzle with some hickory syrup.
Dude. So, and so nutritious. I think that to some degree, leaving a little bit of the tannins in there, those compounds are medicinal in small amounts, and they really do. I mean, if you combine it with something sweet, I'm a winemaker, so I'm getting all geeked out on the flavor combinations, but you bring out the sweetness of the chestnut flour. And I mean, it just sounds so magical. So you have this whole suite of products, and it's hard to know where to go next, because we definitely are not going to cover all of these questions that I have. But one question that I had about the acorns especially, but true of any nut, but it's really true with acorns, especially in a mast year. I mean, those things want to germinate, really quick. So can you take them when they're sprouting? How does that affect anything? Like, when you're talking to your foragers, do you have, sort of specific protocols that they have to follow, or can you take it all? Is it sort of like when you're making cider, you can just take all the stuff off the ground? It doesn't matter if it looks bad. It doesn't matter if there's a worm. You can, you deal with that in the processing.
Yeah, we're more selective than that for something like that. Yeah, if they're sprouting, right. So acorns are kind of like broadly grouped into two categories, either red or white, as two big groups. And there are other groupings, but generally speaking, the white oak acorns sprout in the fall that they hit the ground, and the red oaks will sprout in the spring.
Winter, yeah.
The red oaks tend to have more tannin, allowing them to overwinter and not sprout and resist mold and such. So yeah, the white oaks are a little bit more time dependent. You really gotta be on it. And this year we were really blessed. I mean, I don't know how to frame it, but we had a very dry fall. It was the nicest fall I've ever had for harvesting nuts, because you just had such a long grace period for gathering. They could sit on the ground for a few weeks and not sprout. But it's not always like that in a wet fall. You really got to be on top of it and get them up really as fast as possible, because once they sprout, sprouted grains, sprouted nuts, that's healthy. But you want to have it in a controlled environment. I think there's all kinds of pathogens and mold that can get introduced once that sprout breaks the shell. So yeah, we do take some sprouted nuts, but we're much more picky about that. And so yeah, like you're alluding to, there's a good bit of kind of training that goes into working with these foragers. Not everyone has experience. In fact, most of the people who are gathering nuts with us don't have any experience with it. A lot of them, it's their first time. So yeah, that's definitely a challenge. And and then with the red oaks, like I said, it's a little bit easier. Sometimes I'll even just pick them up and put them in a bag and not touch them for several months, and can deal with them later.
So do you have, because I'm thinking about the nut trees and that I've worked with or been around in my life, and, acorns, like we've covered, there's a sprouting problem, but can you put them in cold storage? Does that, or do you not get enough for that to even be necessary? Because I'm thinking about like mast years, you're going to have to mobilize your people, bring them in and say, this is going to be the year. And so we need to do it in this time frame. I mean, I'm logistically, I'm trying to figure out how this all works for you guys. And are there nuts that you bring in and store, or are you doing everything kind of as it comes in?
Yeah, no. So in the fall, the main thing is to get the nuts shelf stable. And so people are bringing them in for a couple of months. We tend to do like the months of August and November is our harvest window. And as soon as they come in, we get them curing. And so you dry them out. If you dry them, fast enough, we've got a dehumidifier going in the room, and we've got a big kind of like a frame that we built that we put the acorns. Typically they get cured in crates, these like bulb crates that are on a frame with a big fan that's blowing air from underneath. And in that system, they lose about 25% of their weight in water, and that's when we know they're cured in about a week, maybe slightly more than that. In some cases. And so, at that point they're good to go as long as we can keep them dry. After that, there's no concern for sprouting or molding after that.
Okay.
And then in some cases we've got to do some work to kind of sort out any bad nuts, any sprouting nuts. We try to get rocks and leaves out of them before we put them up. So there's a good bit of kind of post-harvest handling that goes on. And ideally, people are bringing them in already in great shape, ready to just go into storage. And that's what we pay that's our kind of our grade A nuts that we pay the top dollar for. And then we'll pay a little bit less depending on how the quality might be less good. With black walnuts, it's a different story. There's a lot more that goes into that. But we typically we're not processing anything for food until like January is typically how our pattern, just because the harvest season is so full on, which is tough because most nut consumption I think is happening in the holidays, especially
Right.
it's like
by the fire because you're at home. Maybe the power went out, and it's like, what are we going to do? We're going to crack some nuts. That's when we did it, and it was so entertaining.
Right. And people have their holidays. It's like there is these kind of like holdovers from a time, these traditions that still exist from when people did actually used to eat these foods. So the kind of holiday tradition of eating nuts, I think, is a pretty strong one. And I've even seen Hammonds refer to that. Like most of their sales of black walnuts happen in, probably in like around Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so, we try our best to kind of have product available for that, but it's always really hard, pretty intense to get that going, which, has been pretty. This year has been really great because we launched our CSA, our tree essay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I love it.
That is, basically it's an influx of cash during harvest season when we don't have any product that we're selling, to kind of help us get through that over the hump until we can kind of start to turn around products. So the way we did the tree essay is we had sales. Most of them happened in September and early October, and then we started our first delivery of boxes was in December, right before Christmas. So that's a model that this is the first year we've done that, and it's working really well so far. And if things still continue to go well, I imagine we'll expand it quite a bit in the future. And ideally, if we can do it, we'll sell, half of our revenue will come from Tree SA members. I think it's a pretty great model for lots of reasons. But going back to what we were talking about with community support and community involvement, that's just another way for people to kind of share the risk and take on a piece of the project and be a part of it. Maybe our Tree SA is just one box a month, and that allows us to get creative with different products that we're including, and it's like not so much of a time crunch every week to get a box out to people.
Do you ship? Because I guarantee you, we're going to get emails asking if people can, people from outside the community can get your stuff.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, we do ship, and yeah, I hope people will reach out to us. I think
I'm
we've even
going
got
to.
the form up. Great. Yeah, you can sign up. I think it's still up on our website. There's a Tree SA tab on our website. You can sign up on the form, and we stopped taking orders. We're deciding. There's a bunch of people who's wanted to sign up after we closed it down, and so we're kind of making a decision if we're going to open it back up for this year and kind of let people still jump in on it this year, or if we'll just kind of push it off till the end of this year and start again. But yeah, please do sign up, and that'll get you on the list, and eventually you'll be part of the Tree SA.
There is a huge sector of the population that are that know that the sort of standard food situation is not serving them, and nuts. I mean, I know there's a lot of nut allergies, but the rise of alternative milks and nut-based products that for people who can't have gluten or whatever. I mean, it seems like having that value added sort of increases your sustainability because, like you say, I mean, the fresh nut consumption. Well, I think it's for people who really like the process of, just taking a little bit more time with their food, which is not that many people anymore. So I think it's brilliant to, diversify in that way. But also then you get to have the waffles with the drizzles and all the things, which, God, it's killing me. Okay. So you heard it here, people. The Tree SA, it's such a cool idea. It's on their website. I know that you have a hard stop here, so I'm not going to try to keep you over, but I do still have a couple of questions, especially about the harvest time. So what does that look like? I mean, are you shining the bat sign into the clouds and say, and like people come and they get trained again? Or do you have enough people now that are fluent in, harvesting? Do you have to, what does that look like?
Yeah, so we have a list, we have our email list of several hundred people, and we put it out there, and we do a little bit of social media, but not a whole lot. We absolutely could stand to do more training. We just haven't had the capacity for that. So that's definitely a goal for future years is to kind of do more, little workshops here and there. Even forays that we lead, we've done that a bit in the past where we'll kind of put the call out and say we're going to be going to these trees and join in on the party, have an old school nutting party. I mean, basically the nuts start falling, and then we're the only game in town. So if they see nuts and they're paying attention, they think to reach out or go to our website.
Do you guys have? Because I just thought of a T-shirt. I mean, do you have the I See Nuts T-shirt yet? I'm sorry. It's just I can't help myself.
I See Nuts. Yeah.
Anyway, if you need more ideas like that, you know where to find.
Yeah, enormous T-shirt opportunities that have been untapped.
Oh my God! Yeah, so good.
Thus far. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So yeah, and that's good advertising too. I mean, yeah, there are a lot of people who have been a part of it in the past and are return participants, and then every year it seems to be about 50-50 every year. There's about half the people come back, and then there's half new people, and actually, I mean, we're growing every year. So this year we had, I think it was over 100 people sign up to be gatherers this year.
Wow,
I don't know
that's so cool.
How many of that actually did. I think it was more like 70.
Still, that's right. That's super rad.
Yeah, it's great, and I think the potential is for it. We could do a lot more, and I hope we will do a lot more in the future. I mean, our goal, we think that kind of on the low end of what we want to be doing, scale wise, is around 20,000 pounds of nuts, and we did 14 or 15,000 this year, and so. I think if we can get a few more people in, we'll be in a good position. And then, I mean, the potential for growth is enormous. I read one fact recently about black walnuts, and the estimated crop of black walnuts in the U.S. is 4 billion pounds per year, of which only 20 million get harvested commercially. So, there's a massively untapped opportunity there. And right, getting folks aware of us, and then continuing to make it viable. Black walnuts are kind of like the gold is the hardest of the nuts for us to work with, but it's the one that is most consistent bearing. It's the mast cycle. It tends to be just like every 2 years with the black walnuts. And in some cases, some trees will bear every single year. And so we have a lot, and we just like have a lot more of them. And it's the kind of like, we think of it as like the low hanging fruit of the nut world, because it's like, it's a nut that's too big not to know. It's just like you have a black walnut in your yard, you have to pick it up so that you don't break your ankles.
Yeah. Well, I would think kids would be, especially, okay, so I know this is a whole nother thing, dealing with kids. It can be such a pain in the ass, but I love them. And there's this part that I wanted to hopefully touch on with you, which is this sort of beautiful educational opportunity about how we regenerate these forests. I mean, black walnuts, they're very willing to plant themselves, and really oaks and all of these trees are, but we don't see them. And so we have a recruitment problem, especially where I live. These are trees that if you see them, they are very old, and you don't see the regeneration as much.
The next generation's not there, right?
Yeah. So how does that fit into like the Acornucopia Project, or is education a big piece of what you guys are trying to do in terms of getting people first and foremost to see these trees in their communities, and then not to put it all on your shoulders, Justin, because you've already done a lot, but can you tell that I just want everybody to start one of these? It's just it's making me so happy.
Well, I think you're doing your part, Mimi. You're getting the word out there.
That's right.
And so I think you brought up a couple of things. I mean, it's funny. One of the big issues in the kind of oak hickory forest is the messification, and how these trees are getting replaced by these shade tolerant, fire intolerant species after a couple centuries of fire suppression. And so oak hickory forests are in decline, and we need intervention to get the next generation, and to get those to recruit into the overstory. And then you also brought that up kind of like in tandem with bringing up kids and working with kids, and like thinking about the next generation there. And absolutely. Like that is a huge part of what we want to be doing. And we have been working on that front quite a bit, actually. Something I didn't mention at all, but we've worked with a few school groups that have come year after year to the Nuttery to help. The kids have volunteered, and we've gone on forays with them to kind of like introduce them to nut trees. And kids are closer to the ground, so it's easier for them to pick up nuts.
And they love to say nuts.
They love to say nuts. Yeah. It's hilarious. You don't even have to have a pun. It's just already funny.
I'm such a child.
So there's so much potential there. And I mean, of course, public schools and like they're getting kids outside and connected to nature, and connecting the curriculum to nature, and hands-on projects where they're doing something that's actually useful in the community, and giving them a kind of a sense of agency. And I think there's just so much potential there. And again, it's it's a
how
lot.
much more
like you
can
said,
you do?
We're doing a lot, and there's so much potential. It's just like I don't know, maybe this is a kind of a good tone to wrap up on, but I just feel the amazing potential, and the kind of like, it's not just like all these great things could happen, but it's like it's kind of like sense of like latent kind of just like power that we have together if we can do this, and like the power that these trees have and these forests have to kind of regenerate our landscapes, ecologically and culturally, if we can, kind of figure out how to work with them and understand what they need and appreciate the gifts that they're giving us and see the ways that that's feeding us.
Yeah. Are you guys still raising money? I mean, are you trying to build capacity to do some of these other layers, or are you hoping that other people through that Acornucopia sort of outreach and, just going into other communities and teaching them what you guys did? Is that still ongoing? I mean, are you guys still raising money for that? I just want to give the opportunity for you to mention that if you are.
Yeah, thank you. I would say yes, both, and
send
all
us
of the
money.
above. If someone is out there and is compelled and wants to support us financially, we are. Basically, where we're at right now is we really like just literally this week turned the corner on our processing to where we like really think that we have it an efficient enough process now that we have our optical sorter online and really working, to where we actually feel like we have a business plan. And so now it's like,
congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. So the work right now is to kind of like get products made to pay our foragers out for the people who want products instead of cash. And hopefully that'll be done in a couple of weeks, and then we can really turn our attention to kind of buckling down and developing a business plan. So yeah, I suspect that we're going to want to pursue investment of some kind, to funding to kind of like, scale up all of these things that we've been kind of doing incrementally. And also, grant funding is I think there's a lot of potential there that we haven't really explored.
There's probably some people listening who are Cracker Jack grant writers. We would welcome them to contact you and write some grants for you. That's just Mimi saying that, but I, for one, don't write grants. So, and it's hard. So anyway.
Yeah. I've tried and haven't had a lot of success.
It takes a lot of time, and some people specialize in that. So anybody out there listening who's a grant specialist, we've got an amazing project for you. Is there anything, Justin? I mean, there's so many more things. I hope that I can have you back, because it would be so cool to check in on you guys in a couple of minutes and see where things go after the grant writer contacts you and all the money starts flooding in. But was there anything that you wish we would have covered?
I don't think so. I mean, one thing that's coming to mind is just shining some light on some other folks who are doing similar work. Like the main one that's coming up right now is Keystone Tree Crops in Pennsylvania area, and Zach Elfers and those folks are working, a similar angle in a different way. And surely there are some others around the country. There's one Black Squirrel Farm in New York that's also working with black walnuts. And so, just to kind of like, just to say, I feel like what we're doing is part of a larger movement that's going on. And, if people are compelled by what we're doing, you might find other folks in your region who are already, devising their own schemes and maybe have them rolling. So, if you're interested in that, I can, if I spend some more time thinking about it, I could probably come up with some other folks who are doing similar stuff, or working on it. If folks want to reach out, and maybe I can plug you into other people in your neighborhood. Or,
I'll reach out. Yeah.
If you got something going on your own, if people are listening and want to connect, we really love to connect and think about ourselves as kind of, yeah, like I said, part of a larger movement, a network, a nutwork.
A nutwork. It's so ripe for all the wordplay. I could spend hours and hours, and I'll definitely reach out to you if there's people who come up that you want us to link in the show notes. Just so
Yeah,
you know,
or if you come up with any great puns, please do.
Don't invite that, man. It's really not a good idea to give me an invitation to wordsmith. So I really, really am so glad that this worked out, because I know that it's taking a lot for you guys to do what you're doing. So for you to spend an hour and a half with me really means a lot. And I'm obviously very enthusiastic about your success. And I would love to have you back and just check in on what you guys are doing in a little bit. And thank you for, for sticking it out. This just kind of 2008 until now. You probably had a few bumps along the road. So thank you. Yeah. Thank Bill. Thank the other guy. And Beverly, all your people. I'm so grateful for all of you. And I'm so glad we got this chance to have the conversation.
Beautiful. Well, thanks so much, Mimi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'd love to come back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cheers, everybody. Go eat some nuts, but only good ones. And we know a guy, so hook it up. Since the intro was so long, and you guys are such champs for listening to my dumb jokes, I'm gonna close this really quickly and just say, Dr. Professor, good luck editing the intro I handed you. Also, thank you, Jesse, Jackson, everyone else, Alex, Natalie, who now has a sweet, sweet addition to her family out in the world. We're so stoked for you, Natalie. I hope it's okay to say that. Anyway, you guys are so happy to know about the Asheville Nuttery now. I want all of you to go out and start one of these. Those of you who are not otherwise already gainfully employed in your own endeavors, if you're looking for something to do, obviously we should plant a tree under which we will never sit. That's it for me today, people. Keep doing that backstroke.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Real quick, some things that we have going on. First, my gosh, has the Patreon page been humming lately? Thank you all so much for the support. And I really hope those discounts on things like seeds and irrigation and boots over there, all that stuff have been helpful. The YouTube channel is going strong with new content for the 2024 growing season. We did a whole seed starting guide and a bunch of other nerdy educational videos. Check out the channel by searching No-Till Growers on YouTube. My goofy face should pop up. Other things, Hannah and I announced our on-farm no-till field days for 2024 here at Rough Draft Farmstead. Tickets are limited, so check those out if you want to come and see the farm here. You can find that at roughdraftfarmstead.com. Also, this weekend, I will be at the Organic Grower School outside of Asheville, North Carolina, with Jackson and several other good folks. And I thought that would be the last one, but I will actually be in Riverside, California for the Grow Riverside and Beyond conference in early April. So that should be a good time. All the links for those in the show notes, and also linked in the show notes is our shop where you can find the Living Soil Handbook and hats and other merch. Buying those things from us through no-tillgrowers.com helps to support work like what you're listening to now. Alternatively, you can join all those new donors who support us at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, and who not only get a bunch of discounts from various companies on seeds and footwear and all sorts of other goodies, but also discounts on things like the aforementioned farm tours here at my farm. That Patreon page is the absolute lifeblood of our work, and at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to DP, Kat Brannigan, Brian Newton, Tyler Rollins, Hank Zecca, Chris Yates, Jill Crosby, Stephen Wilder, Scott Roser, Rob Soma, Sean at All About the Garden, Joseph Sanguinetti, Alex Savatsky, Pear Tree Hill Farm, Stephen and Alex, Stephen Smith, Alberto Diaz, Jason Ruel, Scott Harris, Earth Care farmer Jane Murner, Clément, Grown Up Farm, Bob and Ann Patton of Hexhamshire Organics, Jared Kirst at Rivendell Farm, Dan Brisebois, Steve Larson, Fiona and Donnie of Firefly Farm, Jen Lawrence, and Cameron Pribel. Huge shout out to everyone who supports us in whatever way that you can. You all are incredible. Otherwise, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week. Bye.